It comes to education, a lot of the things that we say we need or claim are missing, we actually have. A lot of things exist, specifically on a smaller scale. That's somewhat of the issue, I think, is that what we already kind of have available and accessible is not really that accessible. And what I mean by that is basically you don't know where to go to find it, and it's not necessarily publicized. In many cases, it's smaller companies, individuals, small organizations, whatever the case may be, that might not necessarily have the funding or the backing to get whatever their product or resource or tool or solution is in front of the people that would likely need it the most and would most likely support it the most. So the question then becomes like, well, what do we do about that? Which is really interesting thinking about even with AI, for example, artificial intelligence, specifically talking about generative AI, where a lot of people are using it as like a search engine, right? Instead of going to Google, a lot of people will pull up like Chat GPT, which not recommending that because there's actually not necessarily like there's a basis for it, but continual use of AI tools, of course, we have proof of issues related to environmental effects and impact. So, constantly going into using this and prompting whenever you could just look it up the old-fashioned way um, is not really a necessary thing. But with that in mind, you could, if you were to do that, think about what is it that you're actually asking for. What are you seeking? And then allowing that tool or resource or whatever. The same thing if you go into Google right now, right? Like Google search bar, it will give you the AI generated results for whatever you put into it, right? Whatever query that you offer. So consider that, right? If you're looking for a certain resource, a certain topic, a certain tool, a certain product, then you can find those things, especially in education. Um, you just have to dig a little bit deeper and go further. Related to that, what I would also recommend, just even think about that, is I mean, kind of again, old school in terms of technology. Like Facebook groups are amazing, especially when it comes to like the homeschool sector and resources, because there's a lot of groups, particularly that focus primarily on low cost or even free resources to only be shared really there. So even for somebody who creates things that are for sale, like myself, you have to be pretty mindful going into some of those groups of what it is that you're putting out and sharing, so that it's not overly salesy or so driven by you know buy my resource, pay for this book, whatever. You do have to give, which is great. So there it creates a little bit of more of a communal impact, which then you can open it up, right, to build trust and share what you do and what you create that other people can tap into and potentially buy. But you have to start at least with, here's what I have to offer, right, without asking you for something. So you can tap into things there because a lot of people are sharing a lot of stuff that they're creating and producing, and then just other things that have actually worked, which I think is a lot of the basis as well, where we have a lot of shiny new things kind of popping up, and it's like, oh, well, let's try this, let's test this out. Um, Versus sometimes being what I would honestly call a little bit more logical and going based on other people's reviews, right? Like, I don't know about anybody else in terms of like traveling, but when I travel, even if going to a restaurant, like we always kind of look at the reviews, right? Even if you're shopping on Amazon, or before you buy a certain thing, if you've never purchased that particular item, then you might scroll down and say, all right, well, what has everybody else said about it? What has their experience been? Because more often than not, if something is highly rated or highly recommended by people that you can at least relatively trust or believe aren't providing false information, even if there's some validity to what they're saying on a normal basis, right? You ask them a question and they typically give you a solid response. Then you can have some type of backing and belief to say, okay, well, this is likely going to be a good experience. This is likely going to be a good thing for me to access, to check out, to look into, to spend my time, effort, energy, maybe even money. So, whatever it is that you're seeking, are there people, maybe not in your direct, um, you know, community or your direct circle that might be able to speak to it, but what about extensions of that, right? So thinking about a lot of these groups, and I know even for educators, a lot of teachers will speak to each other, right, about, hey, what do you think about this? What do have you used this? What are your thoughts here? Strategies, tools, resources, whatever, and then be able to actually have a little bit more of an educated perspective on something before even going into it. And can it create bias or can it be based in bias? Of course, sure. That's a human thing. However, having some type of backing and basis at least, while still keeping in mind that you got to think for yourself, has served people pretty well in a lot of cases. Not every, but in a lot. So thinking about that, the things that we are putting out, for example, I've recently been coming across a lot, a lot of creators on different platforms, particularly like TikTok, for example, where it's focusing on books, right? Black authors, independent authors, authoring strategies, publishing, self publishing, like just different ideas and ways of going about certain things, um, to where you can basically gauge some of that information, see what people are saying and what they're talking about, go and test it out for yourself, right? And then come back. And if you want to share more on it now, then you kind of become a part of that, um, that kind of bolstering of whatever that is. So the same can be said and done for what's being created and produced and shared in education, right? Whenever that comes to what we're doing from home, what's being implemented in after school programs, it doesn't necessarily have to be the school context because, again, within the school, you're going to have a little bit more like, we'll call it red tape. There's not as much autonomy and flexibility, which I'm pretty sure most people are at this point are fairly aware of. Outside of that, though, when we are at home educating our children, or we are in the community working with youth, or we are online, holding a class or something like that, or even just sharing resources among friends and family, there's something to be said about um, more of the kind of individual um, connection and benefit of a lot of these things. And personally, for the stuff that I've produced and created with Melanated Mathematics, with STEM 1000, so on and so forth, getting the feedback and actually hearing those reviews, whether they're glowing and amazing or areas of growth or potential opportunity for growth, um, that makes it all the more better for everybody ultimately, right? For me and what I'm doing, because I don't want to put out anything that's not quality. And at the same time, for anybody who is deciding to support or check out what I'm doing, right? So they can get that, and it gets better every time, right? That's how these things, work on a mass scale in a lot of these larger companies and things that we support. But there is something to be said about people who are more bespoke, we'll call it grassroots, um, and have a little bit more of a we'll call it an inkling or a direct connection to who it is that the intent is to serve, we'll say. So keep that in mind. Again, look for whatever it is. In a lot of cases, I've been able to connect people with different resources, different individuals, even um, based on some of the ideas or questions that they had. And from there, we've seen amazing growth and a lot of collaboration and expansion. But again, some of the things that we know that you won't really hear about, you won't really see as often, propped up in media and things like that. But that doesn't mean that they don't exist, and it doesn't mean that we won't continue to do it. Peace.